Hi, 10, and welcome to this new topic, genetics. So this is a biology topic, so for those of you that have chosen it for next year, it might be something that you really enjoy, but even for those of you that haven't, it's a real introduction into how we pass on characteristics from one generation to the next, and is a good general science and interest topic. So genetics, what I want you to do is pop a heading in your book like a title page, and around that word genetics, I want you to write down as many words or group of words that you can think of that have to do with the word genetics. So when you think of genetics, what do you think of? Now, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, it's your book. And what I'm hoping is at the end of the unit, when I question you again, you can give me a little bit more understanding about what genetics actually is and how it applies to our everyday life. So what I want you to do is pause the video and go and write down as many words as you can think of to what genetics means to you. Okay, so a lot of the time, and using yesterday's activity that you've got, we tend to think of genetics as in inheriting characteristics from our previous generations. Do you look at dad and see that you've got the same shaped ears, as much as you might not like to admit it? Do you look at mum and see that you've got the same shaped nose? It might not be there. The gap in your teeth that may have been fixed with braces, but you might see multiple people in your generations that have that. What characteristics can you think of that you may have inherited from your family? So again, on the next page, I want you to write down just a list of things that you can see. It might be the smile that you have, and it's a similar smile to mum or dad. Have you got a bent pinky finger that you might have thought maybe was due to an injury but is a genetic trait? Have you got mid-digital hair? That's hair sort of in the mid-digit on your fingers. The shape of your hairline, any of those things, have a think. So again, pause the video, have a think, and write down as many things as you can think of that you might see that has come from one parent or another, or even you might see in a grandparent. Okay, my children will hate me. However, looking here, is last year's Christmas photo. So this is my family, and so you can see there I have 2 boys and a daughter. So a lot of people, when they look at my family, will often say, oh gee, your daughter looks a lot like you, which is lovely. We've got similar colour hair, we've got similar colour skin. There certainly are some characteristics, but there are other characteristics there. I see the shape of her eyes are my husband's. She certainly has his intelligence and quick wit and things like that. Then the 2 boys. Now, most people will say my eldest son is pretty much a male version of me, and we again have similar colour skin. He's got my nose, whereas my daughter will have my husband's. My youngest son's the same. Again, they've both got different coloured hair. The boys have got both similar smiles, again, probably similar to me. The boys' shapes of their eyes are similar to mine as well. So you can certainly see that there's some traits there. Now, the cute dog on the side, while I do call him my son, yeah, there's not a lot there that we've inherited. So how did you go with the activity yesterday? So looking here at the inheritance of characteristics, on the sheet that you did have there, the answers were at the bottom upside down, so you may have already checked your answers here. Again, I ran this one through with my kids at home, and there was a couple that they could pick up, not others as quite as easily. The first one that my youngest one did pick up was that parent C did belong to child 7, which is Martin Sheen and Charlie Sheen. If you look here, we have got Bob Geldof, and this is his daughter here, Peaches. So again, if you look at shapes of eyes, I suppose that one's probably the only thing I can really pick up there. The other one my son did pick up here was a Trump, and Donald Trump's earlier wife, not his current one. Again, perhaps shapes of the lips. It's a bit harder, I know, when they get a bit older. Shapes of the eyes and so forth. This is Mick Jagger, and this is Mick Jagger's daughter. Again, probably shape of the eyes and the mouth there a little. This is Hillary Clinton, and this is her daughter Chelsea here. So how much you can see, a similar kind of nose. Eye colour is a little bit harder to see, but perhaps eye colour might have been there as well. So then that leaves Michael Douglas and his father, who I can't think of for the life of me, but that's Mr. Douglas. And then we have Julie Garland. Now, this one's a bit tricky. This is a picture of her young, and she didn't live to an old age. So she was Dorothy in the original Wizard of Oz, and then this is her daughter, Liza Minnelli. So Liza Minnelli is a singer. Her mother obviously sung in a number of shows, but Wizard of Oz was one. And so it's a bit harder to tell there where there is that age gap and in reverse. So hopefully you went okay with that activity. So looking here, what sort of features are usually the ones that we use to help you match them up? So you might have used shape of nose, colour of their eyes, colour of their hair. You might use their lip shape, high cheekbones, any of those things. So as I've already asked you to do, you should have written down a list of features you might notice that may have come from your mother or your father. So what we're going to do in today's lesson is just to recap. And where we need to recap is some things that I'm sure you've done 100 times over, but it's something we need to revisit again, and that is looking at reproduction. So we can't really talk about inheriting characteristics without really talking about, well, how does that happen? And obviously, a child is made with the genetic makeup of a mother and a father. We're not going to labour over this point. We're more just going to recap some of those things you already know and the functions that they are. So we're going to start with the female reproductive system first. So we have got here, and I'd like to think you're able to label these, particularly females. You should know your own parts, but it's important that a male also understands the female bodies, what parts they and how they work. You two one day will be a husband or maybe a husband, and perhaps a father at some stage to a daughter. So it's important that you do understand how these parts work, so that you can understand if your wife or daughter may be experiencing pain, what things you might need to do to be able to understand where that pain is coming from and so forth. So this is our female. So you can see here that there's obviously some differences to the male, but there's also some similarities. So you can see along the back is our backbone. So coming along here is the backbone, and up this way is our pubic bone. So with a female, we have obviously got our ovaries there, which house our eggs. So we're born with all the eggs that we're ever going to have at birth, and about 400,000. But they deteriorate over time, so that by the time we're actually ready to reproduce, there's probably maybe 40,000 left. So a lot have deteriorated. Now, the longer they sit there, the more they can deteriorate, which is why sometimes as we get older, there are greater genetic abnormalities, because they're older eggs and they can have some genetic breakdown there as well. It can also be, as we've said, they've been sitting there a long time, and sometimes we then have fertility issues where the egg's not as viable as it could have been. So usually they talk about, the ripe age, and when fertility starts to drop off is usually after about age 28 or so. Now, in today's society, that's not when most people are ready to have a child, and that's why probably more women are having some trouble with that. So we've got our ovary, which houses our eggs. At time of ovulation, the ovary bursts open and an egg travels down the oviduct. You might have heard it being called the fallopian tube, and it travels down here. It's here that it is usually fertilized. And then it comes into the uterus and implants into the wall of the uterus. Now, that uterus is normally about a pear shape. Now, obviously, it grows in pregnancy to be quite big, but at a normal size in a non-pregnant woman, it's about the size of a pear. So it's coming down. Now, fertilization usually takes place in here, and for most part fertilization occurs and comes in here and implants into the wall of the uterus. If it doesn't make there and embeds in the wall of that oviduct, we get what's called an ectopic pregnancy. Now that oviduct's about the thickness of a hair, so a baby's not going to grow there, but what tends to happen is that oviduct can burst. So usually if that does happen, they tend to remove that oviduct via surgery because it's not going to be a viable pregnancy. So the egg comes along here, is fertilized by a sperm and implants into here. Now, if you look down the bottom here, we can see the bladder that sits just in front of the uterus. So as the uterus gets bigger and bigger and bigger during pregnancy, you can see it puts a lot of pressure on the bladder, and which is why women tend to go to the toilet more. And so if you look here, there's our bladder, and this here, this line just coming down here, is our urethra. Now, our urethra is where the urine exits the body, so where our urine comes out. Now, you can see here then, and not all people know this, so it's good to learn at an earlier age. One person did tell me their husband didn't find out until he was in his mid-50s that women actually have 3 holes. So unlike men that reproduce and expel urine out of the same hole, women have 2 different holes for that, and that is our vagina here. So again, people tend to talk about the vagina being the bit on the outside. That's actually called the vulva. The vagina is actually that muscular tube up here, and it enters, here's the cervix, and then it enters into the uterus there, and down this way obviously is our anus, and the rectum there. So they're the parts of the female reproductive system. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to copy this table into your book. I will give you diagrams of the male and female reproductive parts, so it may be worthwhile leaving a little bit of a space, 15 lines or so. Put the heading female reproductive system, and these are what I want you to write down: the structure and the function of each of the parts. So as we've talked about, the oviduct, sometimes known as the fallopian tube, passage for egg to travel down where fertilization occurs. The uterus stores the developing fetus. The vagina is the path through which sperm travels to the egg, and the baby comes out that way. Ovary produces the eggs. Urethra is where urine leaves the body, and the cervix is the opening to the uterus. So I will get you to please copy that down in your book. So here we can see on the screen our fertility and how it changes over time. So you can see here that at birth, well, there it says we've got about 1 million. I'm sure I've read differently, but anyway, we've got a lot. So at birth, you can see that there are a large number of follicles, and that slowly decreases over time. So you can see between about that 18 to 31 is what they consider to be the optimum time for fertility. But what our body says is an optimum time isn't always coinciding with where we are in terms of either relationship status or work status or whatever else, but that's what our body says. So when we hear people talk about that biological clock ticking, this is what they're referring to. So you can see from 31 to 37, fertility does decrease a little, not significantly so, but where it does significantly decrease is between about 37 and 41. Now I know people, it says end of fertility, I know people over 41 that have had children, so you can't take that one as truthfully as it says there. However, fertility is decreasing, and we can't deny that. We can see that with the large number of people looking into IVF, which is something we're going to look at in this unit. From the age of about 45, we can start to see the onset of irregular cycles. Again, that's not gospel either. It can be much later than that. And then usually once those irregular cycles stop happening, and then your menstrual cycle ceases altogether, and we call that menopause. So just something a little bit interesting for our understanding of the female body. What I'm going to do is put up a Microsoft Forms on Compass for you to answer a couple of questions, just to show A, you've engaged in the lesson, and B, that you've understood what we've done, because there's no point continuing if there's some still areas that you're struggling with there. So as you've probably guessed it, in our next lesson we'll be looking at the male reproductive system. See you then.